Welcome to Another Round, a podcast by the Pacific Research Institute. PRI is a free market think tank headquartered in San Francisco. I'm your host, Rowena Ichon. We called our podcast Another Round after one of the best things about the Golden State, wine country. On this episode, Ben Smithwick, PRI's Director of Development, and I have a freewheeling conversation with Steve Hilton, the host of Fox News Channel's new show, The Next Generation. We talk about big money politics, populists versus elitists, people power, and the theme of his new show, Positive Populism. As for his wine pick, a tradition in Another Round, Steve claims he knows nothing about wine, but indeed, he confessed he took a class to impress the ladies during his dating years. So stay tuned for Steve's wine pick. And if you think there's a party going on in the background of this podcast, well, there is. It's the monthly meeting of PRI's Young Leaders Circle. Special guests were the Sir Anthony Fisher Society members, which is fitting because Steve Hilton is married to the granddaughter of PRI's illustrious founder, Sir Anthony Fisher. Thank you for joining us, Steve. Let's start off with talking about your career. You started your career in politics, rose to become David Cameron's senior advisor. What made you decide to move to the U.S.?
Well, just along the way, though, I feel I ought to point out that in between those two things, in between the beginning, which you're right in saying I started in politics straight out of university when I was at Oxford, and joined the Conservative Party headquarters when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. That's how old I am. And then was there for a couple of years. But in the intervening years, worked at Saatchi & Saatchi, a big ad agency, worked on marketing campaigns, and then started my own business in the UK, and that was great fun, and got involved as an entrepreneur in various ventures. So, and then came back to politics when David Cameron ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party. So there's a lot of steps in between the start and the rising to the position you mentioned. The reason that we came to the US, though, was mainly a family reason, in that my wife Rachel, who's also from the UK, was at one point a senior executive at Google. She ran public relations and government relations at Google, and she ran a global team. But because of my role at that time, working as senior advisor in 10 Downing Street, we were based in the UK, and she was doing a lot of traveling and also lots of late video conferences to take account of the time difference. And so when our second son was born, it just became a bit of a burden, and the time difference and the traveling. And so we decided as a family that it would be best if we could all be together and move to California to make life easier for her. So that was the immediate reason.
And now that you've experienced both worlds, both political systems, what are your thoughts on the similarities and differences, especially now with everything going on?
I think that, there's no question which I prefer as a place to be, which I absolutely am in love with America and with California in particular. I absolutely love being here. I have all the zeal of the convert. I particularly love, there's a phrase I used the other day somewhere, and it really kind of captures it, which is the more I learn about America, the more I love America. I feel really so lucky to be here, and the more I learn about the principles on which America was founded and based, and the Constitution and all those things, which technically I was supposed to already know because I studied them in university, but of course for me anyway, it went in one ear and out the other, and it's not until I've actually been here and actually understood the principles of constitutional government that I'm such a huge fan. So I love America. In terms of the political systems, I think that I think there's one big thing that is similar, which is actually a big theme that I'm sure we'll get to in other parts of our conversation, which is that despite the differences in the way politics works and in the way elections work and all those practical things, I think there is an underlying theme which is very much true in both democracies, which is the sense that people have that the democratic process really isn't democratic, in the sense that the levers of power are not in their hands, but in the hands of the insiders who make decisions on their behalf with very little understanding of their lives or their needs. And there's this very strong sense that the decisions that affect your life are being made by some people somewhere else, very distant from you, both geographically, but certainly in terms of experience and and empathy, and you don't really have any control over the things that matter to you. And the sense of detachment, I think, drives this sense of anger and the populist sentiment that we see everywhere. And I think that is the big thing in common, that this sense of alienation from the political process.
Interesting.
Do you think in the UK it's a little different?
No, I don't. I think that people have a very strong sense that another way of putting it would be that it doesn't matter who they vote for. It's the same people that are in charge. It's the people who run the big global corporations. It's the permanent bureaucracy. It's, they may not itemize it in that way, but there's this very strong sense of, in the UK, whether you elect a Conservative government or a Labour government, whether it's Blair or Major or Cameron or Theresa, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. Nothing changes. And it's the same here. I think people think very strongly. Bush, Obama, Republican, Democrat, who cares? They're all the same. Nothing. The rich get richer, we get screwed. That sentiment. Now, there's a lot of detailed explanations you could give for why that's the case and why it may not be fair and why it's not so simple and all the rest of it. But I think that is very much how people feel. And that is a big failing on the part of the ruling elite, in my view.
Leads me to your company, Crowdpac. The premise of the company is to try to break this stronghold of big money, special interests. How's that going? And tell us a little more about that.
We've been going a few years, and in fact, it originated in the period after soon after we moved here, when I didn't really have a clear plan for what I would be doing next with my career. And very fortunately, the thing that I'd arranged was to teach at Stanford for a year after moving, and I'd sort of fixed that up before we left. And really the experience of being at Stanford, particularly teaching at the design school there, the D school, where you in order to teach it, I had to learn what is taught there, which is basically a methodology of innovation and creative thinking. And just that experience and being there with the students really kind of gave me the bug for doing a startup. And I thought, well, here I am in the middle of Silicon Valley at Stanford University, at the heart of all of this, this is what I should do next. And if I'm going to do something entrepreneurial in technology, which personally I knew nothing about in terms of the tech, I'm not an engineer and have any knowledge of computer science, I thought, well, I better choose an area that I do know something about in terms of the market. And therefore I thought, well, that led me to thinking about politics, government, and that whole area. And I was thinking, well, what is a problem with the way politics works, the way democracy works, that technology might be able to help with? And talking to people and just thinking about it for a while just led me to the problem of money in politics, and which to me, the more I thought about it, was actually a defining problem, in the sense that whatever the other issues are that people get upset about, and rightly so, whether that's partisanship or the inability of parties to work together in Congress to get things done, or the dominance of insider voices, special interests, big business, the unions, whatever way you want to look at it, going back to our earlier point about alienation, actually what drives all that in the end is the money, because in order to operate you need money. The parties are organized in order to raise money. So whether you think the problem is the party system, which is kind of shutting people out because most people are neither Democrat or Republican, they're more fluid mixture of views, and they think that the party system is too rigid and doesn't allow for independence, or whether you think that it's the dominance of the unions on the left or big business on the right, whatever. Money is at the heart of the problem. And actually there's a guy called Larry Lessig, who many of our listeners will know, who is very much a progressive, and we don't agree on all aspects of policy, but I absolutely agree with him on this. He's been a long-standing campaigner on the problem of money and politics, and he puts it very well. He has this phrase, which is, everyone has their own issues. It might be the environment, it might be guns, it might be abortion, it might be fair pay, it might be anything, it might be how capitalism works. But whatever is your issue, the first issue is money. You can't get to solving the issue that you really care about until you solve the issue of money in politics. And so really that's what took me to the idea behind Crowdpac, which is a way of decentralizing and democratizing campaign finance by making it easier for people to run for office, to raise money from the crowd rather than the same old people. Because if you look at the huge amounts of money in American politics, that comes from about 1% of the population. So, and actually, looking at the data that we provide, since the 1980s, the concentration of money has gotten worse and worse and worse, to the point where now 1% of the top 1%, so this is literally about 30,000 people, I think, 1% of the top 1% today account for, I think it's around, the last time we did run the data was like 2012, 43% of all the money in politics is heading towards half, coming from a handful of people. And it's totally outrageous. It's totally corrupt. And our goal at Crowdpac is to try and do something about it. Our effort, I guess you could say, is trying to achieve the goals of campaign finance reform through the market. I think that many people have worked on this issue in all sorts of different ways over the years, whether they're calling for a constitutional amendment or limits on campaign finance or more transparency, whatever. None of them, good luck to them. Our view was there's a market-based solution to this, which is creating a tech platform that just makes the whole process of raising money easier and spreads it through the crowd, so that you bring in more new donors. And that's exactly what's happening. I mean, now we're seeing, especially since the last election, hundreds of candidates now starting their run for office on Crowdpac. We have a product called Start Running, which is unique, which means anyone listening to this who's thinking about running for office, literally it's the only place where you can create a campaign page immediately and start raising money in the form of pledges, just to test the waters, see if you can raise money from your friends and your family, your network, and that all of this before you even decide officially to run. So a lot of the reason that people don't run for office, and that's another issue, which is that the pool of candidates for office is so narrow. I mean, it's mainly lawyers basically, because they have networks they can raise money from. And one of the things that really puts people off running for office, who otherwise could make a great contribution, is the fear that they either won't be able to raise money or they hate the process of raising money. Everyone knows that you've got to have money. And so what we're trying to do is make that whole process simpler, easier. You can start raising pledges on crowdpac.com on Start Running. And if people pledge to you, their card is only charged if you run. So it's a no-risk way of seeing if you've got the support. And for a lot of people, that is the crucial thing, especially if you're talking about people, as we're trying to encourage people to run for office who've never done it before. If you're talking about people, it doesn't have to be running for Senate the first time. You could be talking about local office or even state legislature. A lot of these races don't require a lot of money. That you can do it for very small sums. And actually, just to get that confidence boost of knowing that if you choose to run, you've already got a bunch of friends who've pledged to you, 100 times, and you've got about $1,500. Even that's a really, nice. And we've had some huge successes. I mean, actually, the biggest standout success was actually a Democrat, a lady doctor who got fired up after the Women's March and started getting involved, and actually decided to challenge Jason Chaffetz in his district in Utah. And her campaign really took off. She raised over $500,000 on Crowdpac in a few weeks, to the point where Jason Chaffetz then decided he wasn't going to run again, because he hadn't had a well-funded challenger for ever, basically. So, it's really, really working well, and we're very excited about the opportunity for people to participate. That's what this is all about. It's about broadening participation, so more people get involved. So we see the answer to the problem of money in politics as not less money, but more money from more people. So you dilute the influence of the big donors and the special interests, and you kind of make it a more democratic system.
Your new Fox News show.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about
The Next Revolution. Well, it's just an incredible opportunity. I'm so grateful to Fox News Channel for giving me the opportunity to really set out. I think, in a way, it's an agenda I've been arguing for one way or another all my life, which is the phrase that I use to describe it on the show is positive populism. That's what I mean by that is that I think that a lot of people have seen what's happened with the election 2015 and 2016 with Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders on the left, and the Brexit movement in the UK, and seeing this populist response to some of the problems we talked about earlier in terms of this sense that the insiders control everything. And they see it as a negative thing, and they see it as negative and angry, and you know all the epithets that are used to describe it, racist and xenophobic, whatever. And I just think that that's completely wrong. I think, of course, it's true that there are some people who express their dissatisfaction and frustration with the way things work in a way that is hateful. But that's always been true. I think fundamentally the idea behind the populist uprising is a very positive one, and very consistent with my belief in free markets and decentralized power and putting power in people's hands, and that notion of people power. That's what it really is to me. And so what I want to do on the show is really set out and debate an agenda for people power, for showing how we can put power back in people's hands and give them control over the things that matter in their life. So that's really what it is. And what I'm trying to contrast on the show all the time is not so much as kind of the distinction between left and right, conservative and liberal or progressive or whatever, but actually populist and elitist. To me, that is the distinction that really matters in politics today. Are we acting in the interest of working people, those who are striving to get on, do the best for themselves and their families, who've really been shut out by the way the economy works for so long?
Talk about some of those issues.
Well, I think that, to me, there's the one driving thing, now just focusing on America, is the economic impact of what of the elitism that we've seen, not just in the last, it's not a political point. This is not something that relates to the last presidency. I mean, I would say it goes back at least 30 years. But I think the most telling piece of data that explains what happened in the election last year was the income data that was published just before the election, actually. I think it was in around October, something like that. The Census Bureau published the latest income figures for American households. And actually there was a lot of positive reaction, especially on the Democrat side. Oh, this is great news, because actually it turned out that year, last year, for the first year since the Great Recession, incomes were up. They rose last year. And everyone, great news, incomes are up. Well, that is, of course, good news, but if you look at the long-term data that the Census Bureau published, even including last year's rise, the median income in America, median household income last year, was lower than in 1999. And actually, you look at the distribution of that, literally half American households were poorer last year than in 1999. What does that mean? If you translate that to politics, they've had, going back to our earlier point about dissatisfaction with everyone, they had 8 years of Bush, and they had 8 years of Obama, and at the end of all of that, literally, the rich got richer, and half the country got poorer. That's not a slogan. I mean, of course it is a slogan, but it's what the data show. And so I think that is what is the key factor driving all of this, which is that despite despite all the good things that we all would support in terms of the changes in the economy, the globalization and technology, and all the kind of good things that have delivered genuine benefits, and I wouldn't minimize them, it really has left not just a few people behind, not just a handful of people in deindustrialized areas, as may be the common perception. Half the country is worse off. And that is the critical thing that I think that we need to address. Now, what I'm hoping to do with the next revolution and elsewhere is set out an agenda for dealing with that problem. A positive populist policy agenda for working people to give them the economic security and opportunity that they used to take for granted, that has now completely collapsed.
And how can people find more about what you're working on?
Well, they can watch the show every Sunday at 9 Eastern, or as I'm now duty-bound to say, DVR it on Fox News Channel. I think that's the best place, and if you more specifically, anyone who's listening who wants to run for office, I'm really serious. Remember, there are 500,000 elected positions in America, and you've got to start somewhere, and it may be local, and there's a lot of elections. It's going to be a very busy season, so if they want to go to crowdpac.com and start running, that's a great thing to do as well.
Great. Now, this is the time of our podcast when we ask our guests what their wine recommendation is. So what do you say?
So wine recommendations, I think I mentioned at the beginning when we were just chatting before we got going that I'm probably the worst person to ask about that. I really know nothing about wine. In fact, I'll tell you, years ago, before I was married and I was dating, I thought it was embarrassing that I knew nothing about wine, and I wanted to impress the ladies when I went on dates and order wisely in a restaurant. So this is a true story. I went on a wine course. I booked myself on a wine course with a friend of mine. And I remember thinking this just isn't for me because I couldn't understand what they were saying. I couldn't tell the difference in any of the things. But when they brought the food out, I was like really into the food. You know, the food that they brought out just for the pairing, I was really into that. I'm very greedy. I love food and I love cooking, but I know nothing about wine. So my one reliable recommendation I can make, and particularly we're speaking in the summer and it's a nice time for this, which we drink a lot of rosé. And there is a bottle of rosé that we reliably have in our family called Trienne, which you can get most places, which is reasonably affordable and always delicious. So that's my recommendation.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to tune into Steve Hilton's new show on Fox Channel, The Next Revolution, 9 p.m. on Sundays. And if you want to run for office or thinking of making a political contribution, check out his website, crowdpac.com. Don't forget to follow PRI on Twitter at Pacific Research. And if you like our podcast, tell your friends and encourage them to subscribe in iTunes and leave us good feedback. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll come back again for another round with PRI.